Welcome to the Lida podcast, your space to grow your influence and elevate your personal brand. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical strategies to help you stand out, lift up others, and leave your mark on your team, your community, or the world. If you're ready to make your voice heard, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Well, hello, friends. Here we are again for the Lida podcast. I am so excited about today's episode. As soon as we had our pre-meeting with my guest today, I couldn't stop talking about everything we had just unpacked in a pre-meeting. So buckle up. It's going to be a lot of fun. If this is your first time with us, welcome. I'm so happy you're here, and I know you're going to get a lot of value and get really excited about what my guest is about to share. And if you've been with us before, welcome back. I'm so happy that hopefully you've subscribed and liked, maybe sent a comment, but at least you're listening to the content, because the content is game-changing and it's all designed to serve you. So I want to start off and ask you a question. Has this ever happened to you? I had something happen, and I wonder if this has ever happened to you. I picked up a business book in an airport bookstore recently, and I sat on the plane and I read several pages. And after several pages, I realized I didn't remember what I just read. I literally had just read the information. There wasn't a lot of distraction, but I couldn't remember what I just read. And I thought, is this age? Hopefully not. Is it that the content wasn't interesting? I actually thought it was pretty interesting. Was it, the environment? Was I distracted? No, everybody was pretty much behaving. And I remember being back in school, and I was a really good student. I would study the content, I would retain the content, I would test on the content or apply it in labs or work. And I was good. I was golden. I was a great student. So I thought, at what point did I maybe lose that ability? And I thought, well, maybe it's all the information that's coming at us today, right? It's content online, in person. As we drive down the highway, there's just content everywhere. Is it that my brain, or maybe the adult brain, is learning differently or retaining information differently? I wondered if it could have something to do with AI. Could all this reliance on technology be part of why I'm not retaining information the same way? And maybe you're not either. And yes, I would love to blame AI, but I don't think it's completely that. So I was really curious about this idea of learning, how we take in information, how we process it, and how we actually apply it. Because I teach. I give presentations, I write books, I have a TED Talk and content online. So I'm really passionate about sharing my expertise, my knowledge, but I want to make sure that people aren't sitting on an airplane reading several pages of one of my books and thinking, what did she just talk about? I don't even remember. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I am seeing a lot of really smart, capable, well-intentioned executives giving messages, delivering content, delivering speeches. And I wonder if the people listening are actually getting the information when it matters the most. So today we're going to get underneath all of that. And so selfishly, I'm hoping to learn what it is for me, but also what it is for you and how we can make things better. We're going to talk about how thinking actually forms, how adult learners are different than when we were in school, how learning sticks and how judgment shows up, not just when things are easy, but when it really matters, when we're under pressure. And how do we do all of that in an AI-enabled world? We can't get away from AI. I'm teaching AI. My guest is teaching AI. There's so many nuances to it. And there's the people who teach you how to push the buttons, and the people like my guest and I who teach you how to apply it to build your leadership skills. So I am excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Charles Good. Charles is a leadership and learning science expert who helps organizations close the costly gap between what professionals know and what they can actually do and use on the job. His work sits at the intersection of cognitive science, behavioral economics, and habit formation with a design learning that transfers judgment, behavior, and performance in real world situations. He's the president of IMS, which is the Institute for Management Study. That's a 50-plus-year-old leadership development organization. He's also the host of the Good Leadership podcast, which I've been on a couple times. And Charles has interviewed more than 300 experts and thought leaders in leadership, decision making, learning science, and organizational performance. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Lida, for the great introduction. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, and that was the short bio. Charles is a
That's enough.
Well, if you want to learn more about him, check him out at IMS or on his podcast, or I'm sure on LinkedIn. And I am an IMS instructor. I have been honored to work with the Institute for several years now, providing content to your wonderful members. So I'm doubly excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I kind of teased up in the intro was this idea that, AI is becoming a tool that many of us are using daily, if not hourly. And it shouldn't replace thinking, but it kind of does reveal how well you think. So let's start with something you call the AI paradox, the idea that AI should strengthen, it can strengthen, but it can also weaken human thinking depending on how it's used. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a tendency, our brains are lazy for the most part. We're biologically, that's been proven. So we can use AI the right way as a cognitive sparring partner, or we can use it the wrong way and outsource our thinking to it. And having access to information is not the same thing as having information internalized in your brain. AI can give you the answers, but the answers are not the same as understanding. Think of it this way. A calculator can give you the right answers instantly before you ever learn math. You don't need to know what numbers matter. You don't need to know arithmetic, but you don't know then when the calculator is wrong. You don't know what to do when the problem changes. AI works the same way. It produces language, ideas, and plans, but only to someone who understands the domain and can judge whether it makes sense and to apply them correctly. Another metaphor I love to use when I talk about this regarding outsourcing your thinking to AI, it's like going to the gym and hiring a trainer, which is going to lift the weights for you as you stand nearby. You still show up,
Yeah.
you still feel involved, but your muscles don't grow. So we want to make sure that we use it the right way.
Oh, I got all excited thinking that's how I could lose weight and get in shape is just hire someone. Well, and what you're intimating is, if we're using it the wrong way, then what happens when we're under pressure and we don't have that calculator in front of us or we don't have access to the AI tool? Talk a little bit about what that means in terms of leadership presence.
Well, it really will hurt your leadership presence because there's not a time in which I've ever seen a leader in a high stakes negotiation or when they have a critical conversation with someone to say, hold on, hang on, I need to check AI. That diminishes your leadership presence greatly, vastly, as you know, Lida. You have to have that internalized. Or if you have a script that you've memorized from AI, but don't have that background knowledge that can allow you to pivot in the moment, if the conversation goes sideways, if things don't happen the way you planned, you're left to learn it on the fly. And probably you're going to fumble around it because you don't have that expertise. You haven't practiced. So instead, I really encourage your listeners to use it in three ways, right? As a challenger, have AI, ask AI to poke holes in your strategy, surface counter arguments, or simulate stakeholders that are different from you. Have it be a coach, right? Have AI generate spaced retrieval prompts or vignettes over days and weeks to keep that same learning that you just had top of mind and get that learning to really stick. And perhaps most importantly, have it be your sparring partner. Draft your own solution first. Only then ask AI for alternatives to critique what you just did. You preserve the do the work phase and let AI provide you with the feedback and contrast.
So is that when you talk about how it can actually strengthen human judgment, is that sort of the way that we would do it?
You would leverage it, not replacing the expertise and the learning that you're doing, but fortifying your learning, poking holes at it, making sure that you have a strong argument or considering other parts of the argument to think more critically or
Mm.
perhaps more strategically. It can't replace your thinking, nor should it. I had a guest on my podcast not too long ago, David Ulrich. He's considered the father of modern AR. And he says it's really HI plus AI is what's going to differentiate you in the market. AI is parity, it's equal, right? It makes you equal to everyone else. You need to do it and use it the right way, not the wrong way, but it doesn't give you an advantage to differentiate your brand. It's
Mm.
the HI, the human intelligence, that's going to do that for you. So, what skills are you building internally, internalizing to make you an expert in a space that people are going to think of you as a recognized expert and want to come to you and build your leadership brand?
Really, really interesting. And I love your analogy of the calculator. That's sticking in my mind because it is a tool that we can rely on for certain situations. Do you think leaders today, as they're looking to absorb more information, are they relying too heavily on AI?
Absolutely. It's easy to do. We are inundated by information.
Mhm.
Everyone's in execute mode all the time. So they don't have time to be strategic, to reflect, to think, to really make the deliberate processes you need to make to get that learning to stick. So they feel like, well, I'm overwhelmed. I don't have any time. AI gave me this great answer. I'm just going to send it out. And that might work for simple emails. That might work for low stakes environments or decisions. But when the stakes are high and the pressure is on, your brain is not going to have that understanding, that information internalized, and you are not going to be able to rely on it. And you can't have AI as your thinking partner in those situations.
I taught a program on influence in the age of AI yesterday, and one of the things I shared was an experience I had with an executive that I hadn't met yet. But I looked at her social media. I had corresponded with her. I looked at her blog on her company's website. I really did my homework before meeting her. And she was very polished and very eloquent and passionate and articulate. And when I met her, she was so different. I mean, it's not that she wasn't professional, but she was quirky and fun and this like I thought, well, is she just more relaxed in person? But what I realized is there was a reliance on AI. I would write her an email and the email that I got back did all the typical things that an AI response would do, right? It restated, key points from my message and that's not conversational. So then you're wondering, which is the real person, right? I hoped it was the quirky, fun person I was meeting with because that was much more relatable. But are you seeing that where we're almost becoming like two different people if we rely too heavily on AI?
Absolutely. And you see that a lot, like you just mentioned, with people that you meet in person that
Mhm.
you're having a casual conversation with. They don't have access to technology versus the emails that they send, or even on Zoom meetings to some extent. So it's making sure that I love your question that you've always asked me, and it stays with me every day. Is this on brand for me?
Mm.
And AI doesn't understand your brand. It can't talk like you yet. And it could possibly with enough information that you give it, but should it? AI and Google should extend your thinking, not replace the basic concepts. Those are the ones that you should own. And one question I always ask myself when I choose whether or not to use AI is if the stakes were high and the time was short, what do I need already in my head? That's the stuff that you deliberately need to memorize, understand, build schemas for, and really have a deep understanding of versus just being able to go to Google or AI to get that information.
Love that. I love that. So going back to how I kind of prefaced this conversation with the example of reading a book and then realizing I don't remember what I just read. Um, why I want to talk about this idea that learning sometimes doesn't stick and it just kind of becomes intellectual entertainment. And you talk about why most professional learning systems fail. And it's not because people aren't smart, but it's because the learning is designed in ways that our brains can't use later. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been in the professional learning space for many, many years. It doesn't mean anything about the individual, the attendee. It's just we're not designing these trainings, these professional learnings in a way that our brain actually learns, consolidates, and transfers the information. So I'll give you a few examples, right? The big one I see is the illusion of competence and passive strategies. The primary driver of learning failure is the reliance on these passive learning strategies, such as rereading, sitting through lectures, highlighting text. These methods, they create a feeling of fluency, so
Mhm.
you're familiar with the material, but you mistake that for mastery. And the problem is that a lot of professionals often leave the training feeling confident because the material made sense in the moment.
Mhm.
However, immediate understanding is fleeting because they did not engage in an effortful way with it. They didn't struggle to recall the information without notes. Those neural pathways that were required for the learning to happen and be durable long term were never built. So the learning feels easy in the moment, but it's often transient, here today, gone tomorrow. You want to build more durable learning, which requires these desirable difficulties. Strategies like self testing and spacing that feel harder and slower in the moment, but produce stronger, more durable learning long term. The other one I'll mention is the fire hose effect. And I see this all the time with educators coming into our platform and they want to present so much content. And I said, content is no longer the differentiator. We
Mhm.
can find great content for free online. The differentiator these days is how are you going to curate that information to get people to apply more of what they've learned by getting that learning to stick? And that fire hose effect really is that workplace training ignores the biological limits of what we call working memory. And that's what that is our conscious thinking. And working memory is the bottleneck of all learning.
Mhm.
So you can say that typically a typical person has 5 buckets that they can conscious of information that they can consciously think about at any one point in time. If they get too much information, those buckets fill and nothing else gets in. Nothing gets to long-term memory and they can't think about anything else. And what we find with a lot of professional learning is that it's just a cult of content. There's an inundation of information. And when too much information is presented rapidly without breaks or even with breaks, then we have what's called proactive interference. The earlier concepts interfere with the retention of the later ones. And with working memory being the bottleneck, if it's overwhelmed, information never makes it into long term memory.
Mhm.
So it virtually guarantees the fire hose approach does that most content will be forgotten within about 48 hours, according to the forgetting curve and the Ebbinghaus effect. So less is more and go deeper on that material that you really want your learners to learn effectively and well, and make sure you employ these proven learning strategies.
I think what I heard you say, and I want to go back to it, is that there are two ways that you can kind of improve this. You mentioned spacing, and then you mentioned sort of note taking. We know that typing into a computer is different than handwriting, right? I'm old school. I have pens. I have boxes of pens. Um, are those ways that we can sort of improve? So when I was reading that book on the plane, what could I have done to make that learning stick a little bit better?
So you want to make your learning more active. So you don't want these passive strategies. So rereading and highlighting can be fine as long as they're paired with something else. You just don't want to rely on that. So maybe you're reading a book. Maybe it's a nonfiction because that's usually the ones that you want to retain more information on. It's just not entertainment reading. Maybe after the chapter, you pause, you close the book, and you write down what you remembered. You summarize it. So that's retrieving, right? Retrieval practice is the gold standard of learning science practices. It's pulling information from memory without looking to strengthen both memory and understanding, not more rereading and rewatching. And that's really the first part of professional learning, because you mentioned this in the introduction, Lida, is when we were in school, learning looked different. And I don't know about you, but no one gave me a class on learning how to learn more effectively during my schooling. I picked it up from various sources. And I would argue a lot of us have an outdated learning operating system that we're trying to operate in a professional environment that's not a great fit. So in school, cramming works. And it's even proven by cognitive science. If you have the test the next day and you can retain it, cram 1 or 2 days before, and you'll probably do okay on the test. You'll probably do better if you can space it out, but you'll do fine. But in a professional setting, you're never having the test the next day. The two critical parts of professional learning are one, retention. You need to retain it in your memory, and the application, right? How are you going to apply it and use it? And then application kind of breaks off into transfer. Is it near transfer, something similar, or can we transfer it very broadly to other areas? So when we talk about professional learning, the first major hurdle is the retention of the information, getting that learning to stick. And then the second part is the application, getting it to be used in the right context. And getting back to retrieval practice, that's probably the number one. You can combine the top two strategies called spaced retrieval. So you're retrieving it from memory and you're spacing it out over time.
What does that mean? You're spacing it out over time.
So, based on the forgetting curve and what we know from memory science, you forget, and it's a technical term, at an exponential decay rate. So, if you're teaching a class, Lida, and it's a passive lecture class, and I'm trying to retain it, if I don't reinforce it at some point in time through retrieval, I'm going to lose about 50% within the first day and about 80% within 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
So, think of it as a bucket. You're filling up with water that has holes at the bottom. We forget information unless it's continually reinforced. So you want to space out that retrieval. So maybe you want to close your book right after you just read that chapter to recall what you can, but you also want to do it a couple days after, a week after, a month after, to prevent forgetting to take its effects, to make sure that you retrieve it, it's effortful, and you bring it back to mind. You strengthen those neural pathways so you're more likely to remember it long term than just for the next day for that test.
I also find if I just tell somebody what I just heard, right? If I
Teaching is a great way.
Yeah, a webinar or I'm reading something and I debrief somebody else on the content, that it helps me retain it.
That's an excellent method. Richard Feynman, he was a Nobel laureate physicist, probably one of the greatest teachers of all time. Bill Gates called him the greatest teacher he never had. It's the Feynman method. And I think the big distinction here, and I love his quote here, is that he said, knowing something is different than knowing the name of something. So how can you understand it? Well, it's reading it, it's teaching it, and it's teaching it in a simple language like you're teaching a 12-year-old. So not making assumptions, because we get into the curse of knowledge and the expert effect, and making sure that there are certain assumptions that you're assuming the audience to have. But could you teach that to a 12-year-old in simple language without them having any background in it? If so, you probably know it pretty well.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work with an executive coach? I've had the honor of working with professionals, entrepreneurs, and executives in over 38 countries, helping them navigate the career process through the lens of personal branding and reputation management. The tools that I use allows us to co-create a strategy that puts you in the best position for control and influence over your career and your target community. If you're interested in learning more about personal branding, let's talk.
So you mentioned this expertise issue, and we know that expertise, according to you, can make somebody a worse communicator, which almost seems counterintuitive, because I would think the more you know, the more you can share. But you're saying unless you understand how learning happens, it can actually create more problems than it does share information. Tell us about that.
Well, as anyone gains expertise, much of what they do becomes automated. That's good for performance. That's terrible for teaching because they forget what it's like not to know something. Expert knowledge moves from conscious steps in working memory to fast compiled habits that are run on autopilot. So with that, when we see that happen in a learning situation, a lot of experts skip steps. You just jump from problem to solution without articulating the intermediate moves, or you talk in an abstract language. The abstract language is a language of the expert. If you want to connect with novices, beginners, the concrete language is the language of the beginner. You have to specify concrete language, specific people doing specific things, give examples, illustrate it. Abstract principles talk to more of the deep structure of something. A novice, a beginner, is not going to understand the deep structure. They have to have a lot of practice, have a lot of background knowledge to really understand that. So what I see a lot happening in organizations with professional learning is career specialists can't externalize what they've internalized. It's just second nature. It's hard to teach.
Mm.
So, how do you get them to do that? Well, you can make their thinking visible. So, you can say, I want you to narrate your thinking as you're doing this. So they're going through the process. Here's what I noticed. Here's what I inferred. Here's why I choose X over Y. What does this do? This exposes the implicit learning that they're not teaching explicitly, those hidden cognitive steps that novices need in order to practice. Or you can have them break the skills into components. Instead of saying to the expert, how do I run better meetings? Specify to them, okay, let's talk about the objective of a meeting. Walk me through that process. Talk to me now about decisions versus debates. What should I do in that context?
Mhm.
You can
Well,
also go ahead, Lida.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you can also just the other one that I don't see as effective is teach as if it was the first time, right? Assume nothing is obvious, but that's hard because experts don't know what's obvious to them versus obvious to someone they're teaching.
So that brings up a question that's going through my mind as you're talking, because I do a lot of speaking and presenting, and some people listening might present every once in a while, or they might do a lot of instruction. And I always say it's important to know your audience, right? So how well does my audience know the topic? Because if I do speak to them as if they don't know the topic, it can sound really basic. So how does that factor in?
That's hard because when you have a mixed audience,
Mhm.
it's really hard to customize to what you need. There's a great, I would say, learning principle is really focus and structure the learning for the extremes,
Mm.
and the middle will take care of itself. So look at the outliers. Look at the people that are not getting it at all to make sure that you're going slow enough so they can get it to some extent, so they're not completely lost. But and then also look at those that are experts, that are the high performers. Is it too slow and boring for them? If you can solve those two challenges, especially simultaneously, which is tough to do, the middle takes care of itself. Instead of going for the average performer, design for the extremes, which helps. Now, it's always better to have a more homogenized
Yeah.
audience, right? So that it's not so heterogeneous and you have people on all levels.
Mhm.
But if you do, that's one strategy. Another one is having them ask questions, which is what we do at the Institute for Management Studies a lot. We want them to interact, to participate, to engage, because we want it to be connected to what they need it for and their situation, which many people in professional learning, which I'm kind of dumbfounded on when an organization feels, okay, now you took a class on communication, now you can communicate in all these contexts. No, when you first learn something and you're trying it out, you have a very near transfer effect. Meaning, if they taught communication and giving corrective feedback,
Mhm.
that's how they're going to be able to do it moving forward. They're not going to have it being provided these models in all these situations where they see application. It's just never the case. So we have to assume that one, they're not going to be able to transfer that far from how we teach it. So if we teach with feedback, then they're going to use it in feedback. They're not going to see, oh, I could use this model when I'm delegating, when I'm talking to people in tough conversations. That will come over time as they get more comfortable with the frameworks, see the deeper principles, and are able to have that far transfer effect. But initially, after training, after professional learning, the near transfer is all you should expect them to have moving forward.
So when you think about the near transfer, how important is the power of storytelling? Because I'm passionate about storytelling and I know you are too, but how does that help the learning stick?
Tremendously. It's everyone can be a great storyteller. It's not a skill that you're born with and don't have. Stories are remembered, some studies say 22 to 25 times better than any other type. If you want your facts to be remembered on Friday and you have training on Monday, package them within a story. One of my favorite books from Jonah Berger, he stated, if you want to convince someone of something, don't give them a disparate list of facts. Make it like the Trojan horse. Put the facts inside a story. It's going to be so much better remembered. Think of what Hollywood has built their brand on. It's great storytelling, the hero's journey. You can go through all of the various phases of, or the different huge Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all these big franchises. It's that same journey played out again and again. And you don't need to be an expert. You need to look for stories. You need to identify where you can find great stories. But storytelling, to me, an essential skill. It's something that helps with the transfer, gets it to relate better to what they need it for, better remembered, more engaging. And in any training, we encourage everyone, as you know, Lida, to start with a story.
Mhm.
Because until they know why it's important to them, they're probably going to disengage. So it's your brain's native language. And one cognitive psychologist said, it's the psychologically preferred way to hear something is through storytelling. We are wired, our brains are wired for stories.
And I often share that because, as you know, I mean, I work in, I think we added it up, 38 countries. And the one through line of all the work that I do is storytelling. Because whether you grew up in India or Canada or Europe or United States, we learn through stories. Somebody taught us right and wrong. They taught us good and bad. They taught us lessons of life through books and stories. It may have been a parent or a caregiver or a teacher. So there's that through line, but there's also a challenge with storytelling that if I share a story that doesn't translate, that is too American to an audience that's international, then they can't relate to it. So there's so much nuance. And I love that you say that anybody can learn this because we've all seen the master storytellers and they bring us in and we are just enthralled and we remember the story. And then we think, well, I could never do that. Well, they learned it, right? That's what you're
They've
saying.
practiced that story again and again. They only have a select few stories that they've rehearsed and given so many times. They have the timing down, they have everything down. People, we are lazy and they forget that when content is delivered in bulleted lists and frameworks that has no causal spine, we're not going to remember it. The brains never see what changed, why it mattered, what happens next. That's all part of great storytelling. Someone once told me, if you want to get started, just start looking for stories and ask 3 questions and answer them in a mini narrative to try to build a story. So, what was the situation or status quo?
Mhm.
What tension or problem disrupted it? And then what decision or action changed that trajectory and what followed? So it
Mm.
just helps you to kind of think in that framework of you need a causality, events linked by cause, not just time. You need a conflict, a character pursuing a goal against obstacles. There should be some complications, attempts to solve the problem that create perhaps new problems. And you have to fall in love with the character, right? Or you have to connect in some way with the character. We remember people in action, not with abstract labels.
And even if it happened in an environment that I've never been in or an experience I've never, to your point, if those three elements are there, then I relate even as an outsider and I'll remember the story, which is so important because stories can be transferred. And that's where their power really grows.
Yep.
One of the things you and I talked about as we were getting ready for this conversation, and you pointed out that that was a myth, is I thought people learned auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, right? And I've always said to people, I'm a visual learner. So if you show me, or if I'm able to test it out kinesthetically, then I'm going to remember the information. And you actually pointed out that that was a learning myth. So I want you to unpack that and tell us what else is a learning myth.
Well, I would say that there is some truth in that. We just rely too heavily on it. So
Okay.
studies fail to show that matching instruction to self-reported learning style can reliably improve learning.
Mm.
What matters is matching the method to the material. So diagrams for spatial ideas, examples, and practice for procedures. Because if you're so limiting to say, I don't learn that way, I can only learn auditory wise, some material's not designed for that, and it's going to make the whole learning process slower.
Mm.
So instead of chasing styles, it's I mean, that distracts you from those high impact strategies like we discussed, like retrieval, spacing, and feedback.
Right.
So just keep that in mind that, yeah, the medium didn't match any style, it matched how that material was best taught. Some of the
So,
other ones that we hear a lot are we only use 10% of our brain, right? I think that's neuroscience, that, and 90% lies dormant, right? That could be activated, and we have all this untapped potential. It's nice to think that that would be the case. Neuroscience says that's absolutely not the case.
Hmm.
They show that widespread metabolic activity across the brain, even at rest. Now, damage to some small regions have some obvious consequences because then it indicates which parts of the brain are in use. But given a certain activity, you aren't going to see the entire brain light up, but you're going to see enough of the brain to know, okay, here's the areas that need to be involved with this task or process. And at certain times throughout the day, your entire brain is activated in some way. So there's not this part of the brain that's lying dormant, waiting to be used that we could just access it, like you see in the famous Hollywood movies like Limitless or Lucy or one of those that would be nice to have and nice to have a drug for. The final one I'll mention is brain training apps. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the disheartening finding, and this is proved on many cognitive scientists, the research studies are there. Playing these brain training games give you a broad cognitive upgrade is not the case. Now, they make you better at practicing those games with very limited transfer to the real world tasks. So it shows, right, very narrow transfer. So if playing the game complements very well what you're doing in work, great. It's probably going to help you. Is it going to increase your cognitive performance, your IQ? No. And they bring in certain studies that aren't very evidence based to try to substantiate their claims. And people are playing these thinking, wow, it's great. Now, there's also something called the placebo effect that if you think it's doing something well, then there could be some physiologically dependent or evidence for that, but it's not significant. So instead, your knowledge and your expertise is very domain dependent. If you want to get better at chess, play chess. Don't play brain games thinking that that broad cognitive performance gain that you're hoping to get is going to help you play chess better. I can go through some more, but I'll stop right there because there's so many to unpack.
No, that's so fascinating. Yeah, I think we all, we play those games because we've been told, right or wrong, as you're saying, that, it's going to keep us sharp longer. It's going to stave off, mental fatigue or all of that. And so I think to your point, whether it is placebo or whether it's actually doing it, I guess we don't have A/B testing on that because it's my brain. So, there's only one way it's going. Um, any other myth? I'll just ask you if there's one more that you hear a lot that you're just like,
How
oh,
about this one? This one, the 10,000 hour rule guarantees expertise. It became famous from Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers. And he took the work from Anders Ericsson in the book Peak. And Anders Ericsson, he was one of the primary researchers in deliberate practice. So the original work by Ericsson showed correlation, not causation, between accumulated deliberate practice, which is a certain type of practice, and expertise in certain fields or domains, like chess.
mm,
Not all domains, but just certain domains. Not a magic number, but it was really dependent on the quality structure of the type of practice. Correlation doesn't mean causation. You can practice for 10,000 hours and not get hardly any better. Two, two common things that we all do to prove this point. I don't know about you, Lita, but I've been typing probably for 40 years. My typing speed has not increased probably in almost that period of time. I've just been satisfied with that. So I've put in the 10,000 hours. I wouldn't say I'm an expert typist. I'm just going through the reps each and every time. Same with driving a car. I might think of myself as a better driver than most, probably not. I haven't improved my driving skill. It's something that has plateaued, even though I've gotten the practice and gotten the reps, I haven't gotten any better.
mm.
So if you want to get better, it's almost that you want to design the practice so that it's more deliberate, so that you're breaking down the task into smaller pieces and you're focusing on the things where you're the weakest. You're getting immediate feedback on those and you're isolating areas of improvement, stretching past your comfort zone. Volume without structure is just time served. And the danger is that it's not going to make you any better.
I love what you said. And as for typing, yeah, once you put these long fingernails on, it's all bets are off because my typing speed went way down. Have you read Malcolm Gladwell's follow-up book to Outliers?
I
Yeah.
have, yes.
He,
So
he kind
that,
of he kind of talks about, some of the initial assumptions have been challenged and how we need to layer in different context and So it's fascinating to see how his thinking has evolved on that same myth or premise.
You're right. And that was great that he did that because people took that and took it into ways he didn't intend.
Yeah.
10,000 hours of mediocre practice just automates mediocrity.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so there's this other theme that you talk about, which is that sustainable change, right? If I want to get better at this, if I want to be, more efficient, more a better learner, a better communicator, that it comes through systems, not necessarily motivations. And you make the distinction between goals and systems, and why systems actually drive behavior change. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this comes from James Clear's work, Atomic Habits, huge bestseller.
Yeah.
And what he says there is that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. What are you doing every day to make progress, to keep you motivated on that goal? You should look up at the distant goal every now and then to make sure you're moving in the same direction, but then stop looking at the goal, stop and start focusing on what is that process that you're implementing each and every day to make you get a little bit better each and every day. He said, go for those marginal gains, those 1% improvements, because if you have 1% increase every single day,
Mhm.
I think it was something like by the end of the year, you're going to be 37% better. Marginal gains are happening all around us. He has a great story in the book about the British cycling team
Mhm.
and how they weren't even in the top, I don't think they were even in the top 20 teams in the world. They were awful.
Yeah.
New coach came in, marginal gains. He was looking at things that were so small to be almost unnoticeable. Like, let's paint the bottom of the vans white so we can see the dirt, so we can make sure we have a clean environment so the bikes don't get dirty. Let's bring the mattresses of the cyclists with us so they can get a good night's sleep before the races. He
Mhm.
guaranteed the British Cycling Foundation that within 10 years, he was going to win the Tour de France, which everyone said, you're joking. It
Right.
actually happened in 5 years from these marginal gains that are happening each and every time. So it's not looking for these drive through breakthroughs, these hacks. It's how can I get a little bit better each day, keep that motivation going, and then occasionally look up at that long term goal to make sure that you're still moving in the right direction.
So how do we apply like tiny habits, what you're talking about, the clear idea, to professional transformation, to our ability to communicate or to take in information?
So almost half of our waking moments is done on autopilot. Half of our day is spent with habits. Our brain is lazy. As soon as it knows, it looks in our memory, identifies a script through our basal ganglia part of our brain to say, okay, this is a habit I can run, and this
Mhm.
is going to solve this problem again. So habits are incredibly important. And if you want to build new habits, and we're kind of close to the beginning of the year, and we always have these New Year's resolutions. Well, the issue is that we just try to tackle too much, or we're not ready to take on that challenge. We just think, well, we need to because it's the beginning of the year. So BJ Fogg out of Stanford has a great practice. He has a great whole framework around this, but really just three steps of it. First, cues. What can you cue in your current routine that you can connect to your new habit? I mentioned earlier, if you want to floss your teeth, well, I brush my teeth every day, so I want to floss on the same frequency as brushing. So I'm going to cue my flossing routine be- right after I brush my teeth, which is less cognitive load because I already have a habit in place.
Mhm.
I just have to add it to the back end of it. It's called habit stacking.
Mhm.
And then you can have this implementation intention that helps as well to say, at this time, I'm going to do this with this person. Having a planned intention also helps. So the cue, find that cue. Once you find the cue, have a tiny habit happen. So it's not a big one. So if you want to floss your teeth, floss one tooth. If you want to do 100 push-ups, just do one push-up. If you want to go to the gym, just put your gym clothes by the front door the night before. Maybe that's all you do for a week. What that does to the brain is it doesn't matter if you go to the gym or not. It puts the checkbox to say, I'm the type of person that shows up and am building this identity. Because long term habit formation, which Clear and BJ Fogg mentioned, is all about changing your identity,
Mm.
changing it from a verb to a noun. Instead of saying, I am someone that needs to run, I'm a runner. You want that identity to stick because once it becomes part of who you are, the habit is sealed in and you got it locked. So, tiny habit, something small, something that on your worst day you can do, so you don't have any issues with not doing.
Mhm.
So easy so that you can't fail at it. And then the third part is a celebration. Many people skip this step. They feel celebration. Come on.
Yeah.
If you can have a positive emotion tied immediately to that new habit, it wires it in so much faster. Fogg calls it shine, that deliberate pride that you have in what you're doing. Now, if it's a small thing, right, you aren't going to jump up and down and scream maybe, but identify a shine moment that you can do privately and one you can do publicly. So
Hmm.
that if you're in public, you don't look weird or you aren't embarrassed by what you're doing. But maybe it's just like saying yes, or you got this. But something that will give you that positive moment of pride that will help lock that habit in even faster. So the 3-step framework: cue, tiny habit, celebration. Try it with just a habit that you want to form. Try just one habit at a time and then build from there.
So building on that, we always hear that successful leaders read 100 books a year. And you and I've discussed that, whether that's a good thing or not. But what if that was my goal? How would I stack these cues and habits and celebrations and at the same time not make it a game to run to the end and really retain the information? I'm trying to bring it back to kind of what we started with. We want to be able to use the information, not just say, I read that book.
Well, yeah, and you can develop, I mean, if you already have a habit of reading books, great, the habit is set in place. Now you just have to work on the process, right?
Mm.
Where nothing is sticking. I mean, I did this for too long that I don't even want to say how many years, but it's just I felt like, oh wow, I read 50 books. I was doing this and that, but nothing was sticking because it was a very passive learning strategy. So it's really just making it a more active process. So if you're, I mean, I'll just walk through my process. I don't read books physically anymore. I just read them on Kindle. It's just easier. I My wife loves the physical books, how they feel in her hands. Great. But for me, it's, I read the book. I'm actively thinking, I'm elaborating on stuff. So I'm asking how and why questions. How can I apply it to what I'm using it for? How does this connect to prior knowledge? You want to connect it to what you already know
Mhm.
and you want to apply it right away. Don't read the book you need in 10 years. Read the book you need today that you're going to use and apply today. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. You're not going to remember it. It might be great insights while you're reading it, but nothing's going to stick.
Right.
So have that piece in place first. And then I highlight,
Mhm.
I take notes at the margin, and then I have what's called Readwise. It's an app that allows you to download your highlights from a Kindle app into their platform. And
Mhm.
what that does basically is it allows you to just collect those highlights. It does some spaced retrieval. So it gives you maybe in a day, a week, a month, some of those highlights back to you in the form of questions. So to see if you can prompt you to try to remember and
Mhm.
understand what those were. But I take it a step further. Then I put those highlights into Obsidian, which is kind of my second brain knowledge system. And then I construct it from effortful retrieval and trying to say, okay, what am I going to use? Because usually I highlight way too much.
Right.
What are the 10 things that I think are the big things that I can use right now? And try to do experiments with those. Well, I'm going to apply this tomorrow. I'm going to use this in my next speech, in my next email, in my next article. So find ways to use it and apply it right away. Make it a more active process. Ask those how and why questions, and or just close the book after each page, because you'd be amazed how much you recall or don't recall from doing that. You have this false sense of competence thinking, well, I know it. Okay, well, shut the book and prove it to yourself. And if you can, great. If you can't, I see that all the time with professionals. They just can't recall what they thought they knew.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about memory, the last tip I'll give you is memory is as thinking does. So if you're not thinking about it deeply, thinking about the meaning, it's not going to get in your memory. Just wanting to remember something doesn't work. It's what are you actively thinking about? If you're going to process meaning, then you're going to be able to remember it better. There was one famous cognitive experiment where they gave two groups of subjects. One group of subject they gave I think it was 10 to 20 words. And they said, okay, just count the number of E's and I's. So they did that. The next group of subjects, they said, here's the 10 to 20 words, but tell me if they're pleasant or unpleasant. So they did that. A day later, they came back. And for the first group that counted the I's and the E's, They said, how many of those words you remember? Their recall was awful. It was below 20%. They didn't have to process meaning. The second group, when they had to understand, okay, the word and process meaning because they had to identify, was it pleasant or unpleasant? Their recall was close to 70%. And it was just because of what they deliberately wanted to focus on, the meaning of it, not just a cursory view of it. So make sure that when you're reading something that you're really focusing on the meaning. How does it connect to prior knowledge? How am I going to use it? That processes it in a deeper way than just having it read on the page, because all books don't have a logical flow that helps you to learn better. So you have to provide that structure yourself. Hopefully that was helpful.
No, as an author, I'm chuckling because yeah, that is probably one of the biggest challenges when we go through editing is making sure that the reader, and to your earlier point, whether they're an expert or this is the first time they're hearing the content. I mean, there's so many pieces that we've covered in our time together that are coming together as you say that. And it's absolutely fascinating. I think I have selfishly taking away so many new techniques that I can start using to apply what I'm reading and also be more mindful of the adults that I'm talking to and teaching because they're learning differently. And I just loved what you said about how we learn in school, right? There's not a test the next day. We're not cramming for an exam. This is information we want people to apply. So, I mean, I just think in our short time together, you've made me a better learner. You probably made me a better speaker. And I know our listeners are getting so much value. I'm also seeing a lot of intersection and overlap between reputation and how we present ourselves. That whole expert, what did you call it? The curse of knowledge, right? Gosh, that is so prevalent today where, that's not your reputation. Subject matter expertise is not what we engage with. We engage with the stories that that expert is able to use the data to tell us through. And so I think there's so many threads that we've sort of unpacked with reputation and influence, but also with learning. And I'm going to be thinking about this for days, I know. And also one of the biggest takeaways I think I've heard from you, Charles, is that reputation, learning, influence, all the things that I focus on, they're not separate skills. They all work together and they really reinforce how we show up, how we communicate our vision, our message, our beliefs, and how that turns out into a reputation. So I would say,
Absolutely.
yeah, I would say to our listeners, as you reflect on this episode, really think about the moments that are shaping your learning, your influence, and the ways that you're behaving and building a reputation, the meetings that you're in, the decisions that you're part of, the conversations that you're involved in or that you're taking a back seat in, because all of that matters. And what Charles really pointed out is it's not what you've read, it's what you can apply. And we all know those people who can rattle off book titles left and right. And it's like, awesome. But what does it all mean? So when you can tie it all together and really create meaning, it's such an elegant context, right? And AI can help us get there, but it's not going to have that elegance. It's not going to have that human social connection that is so important.
Well, I'll just end, Lida, with just learning how to learn is really the meta skill for all professionals moving forward.
Yeah.
People ask me all the time, Charles, I don't have time to do this. I have this crushing deadline. I need to be more productive. I said, but you don't understand because learning is the one skill that rules them all. It makes everything faster and accelerates. So if you start at that foundational level to build this meta skill, to make you a faster, more efficient learner, to get that learning to stick, it's going to benefit you in so many different ways. And I would argue differentiate your brand faster than almost anything else because leaders are readers, but the faster you learn is the faster you earn in most often cases. And we are having so much change with AI and technology. We're having to learn faster and faster. How are you going to keep up with this information and make sure that it sticks, that you can leverage and use it for your brand?
Absolutely love it. Charles, thank you so much. I knew
Thank
this was
you.
going to be a lot of fun. I knew we were going to just have so much to talk about. You are a wealth of knowledge. IMS is providing so much value to the member clients that participate. And Thank you for stewarding that ship. Your podcast is great. People connect with Charles, learn more about what he's working on. And if you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. Maybe there's someone you work with who's kind of struggling with some of these same ideas. Share it with them. Be sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening and leave a comment. Let us know what your favorite takeaway from this conversation was. Charles, again, thank you. And until I see you all next time, this was the Lida Citroen podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Lida.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lida Citroen podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show and leave a review. It helps more people discover these inspiring conversations. For more tools, insights, and resources, visit Lida360.com or connect with Lida on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, your influence has the power to make a real difference.